like to introduce Mr. Tariq Ahmedezva from IRENA, who will moderate the panel discussion and tell us a few words about IRENA's relevant flagship initiative, the Climate Investment Platform. Please join me in welcoming our panelists and speakers to the discussions and wish you a productive and fruitful exchange afterwards. Thank you. So I'd like to give you the word, Jin-Kyung, for the presentation.
Thank you, Alice. Oh, wow, it's loud. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jin-Kyung Jung, Associate Program Officer from the Project Facilitation and Support Division of IRENA. Today, I am pleased to present to you the findings of IRENA's recently issued report, Bracing for Climate Impact, Renewables as a Climate Change Adaptation Strategy. I'll be showcasing some of the potentials of renewable energy in addressing climate adaptation with an integrated mitigation adaptation approach to climate action. This is a timely topic, and with the increasing frequency and intensity of the impacts of climate change, adaptation has gained significant recognition in the recent years. We are also observing an increasing flow of finance towards adaptation activities at international and national levels. While many climate adaptation strategies require considerable energy use, yet the role of reliable, affordable, and modern renewable energy services are not widely acknowledged in policymaking or practices of climate change adaptation actions. And these are key topics that we want to cover. The topic in a comprehensive way. We will be structuring this presentation in 4 main groups. First, I'll be providing some key background information on climate adaptation related to our topic today. In second section, I will aim to discuss the linkages between renewable energy and climate adaptation. In section 3, I will be introducing CIP, an initiative with IRENA, and discuss adaptation-focused renewable energy financing. Section 4 will conclude with the way forward, which will extend to further discussions during our panel session. Now that we know the overall structure of the presentation, I would like to jump straight into the first section, framing climate adaptation and providing insights on the conceptual background. So we hear this terminology, adaptation, all the time, but it remains a challenging topic for everyone because the concept of climate change adaptation is still evolving. This is also mainly due to the fact that there exists intrinsic relationship between climate change adaptation action and sustainable development. So there isn't really a clear line between two. Although there exists no single unanimous definition of climate adaptation, the above definition on the slide is often used by IPCC and UNFCCC. And while concept is still remaining broad, adaptation generally focuses on reducing vulnerability and impacts of climate change and on enhancing adaptation capacity and resilience of societies. Another important background that I would like to highlight here is that mitigation and adaptations are 2 essential pillars of response to reduce negative impacts of climate change. But up to date, most mitigation and adaptation interventions have been implemented separately in projects and policies. Therefore, mitigation and adaptation have been forced to competing for investments and planning of resources. In this context, the role of renewable energy technologies and integrating the 2 concepts can be considered vital, and this is what this report aims to provide. So building on my last note, now I will further discuss the linkage between renewable energy and climate adaptation, starting with the discussion around energy uses and climate adaptation. As discussed, recently there has been a growing acceptance that energy and climate change adaptation are deeply connected. the past debates have been around how energy sector has created climate change, but now the narrative is now moving to how we can use energy to address climate change issues. So there are two dimensions in which energy and climate change adaptation intersect. First is on how energy sector would adapt to climate change, as climate change has increased the exposure of power systems to climate impacts. Second, the topic that we would like to focus on today is around how energy service generally enhances the adaptive capacity of people, communities, especially remote regions with high vulnerability. So just for example, this table aims to showcase such benefits. Energy services are vital to many activities required to respond to numerous climate change impacts. So focusing on COP15's thematic focus on land and desertification, the table illustrates some energy-related adaptation interventions associated with drought. However, I'm not sure if everyone can see, but it shows there are 4 columns. On the very left, the impact of climate change is drought. Drought causes key risks such as water shortage, degraded water quality, and the third column is on energy services that are required to address these risks, such as desalination, water distribution, wastewater treatment, irrigation, pumping. However, there are challenges at hand because most of these adaptation solutions are energy intensive. Air conditioning, desalination, and water irrigation systems require energy-intensive adaptation solutions, making climate change sometimes even worse owing to their greenhouse gas emissions. So the trade-offs become inevitable, as you can see on the figure on the left, on the upper left quadrant. It is possible to reduce vulnerability, but at the same time, often emissions are increased. Amongst various energy sources, renewable energy can facilitate climate adaptation actions without resulting in significant greenhouse gas emissions. So renewable energy enables the sustainable win-win solution that is depicted on the upper right quadrant of the right figure. So rather than trade-offs between mitigation and adaptation, with the net zero emissions impact, renewable energy enables adaptations such as air conditioning and irrigation systems to move from being increased emission solutions to a sustainable win-win solution. So drawing on the previous, renewable energy solutions can be implemented in different sectors, including those mentioned in blue boxes on this slide here. And emphasizing on the particular sectoral relevance for this COP15, I will discuss applications of renewable energy technologies in the water sector, food, agricultural, and forestry sector, and in natural disaster response, just as examples for our brief presentation today. So, actually, in the actual report, you'll be able to see this table for each sector, illustrating on the very left the climate impact, and then for each of the climate impact, what adaptation service is required, and the energy-related measures, and specific examples of different renewable energy technologies as solutions serving as these measures. Because this is a brief presentation, I will be providing just 1 or 2 examples for each sector, but you'll be able to find illustration and explanation on specific projects and case studies in the actual report. So in the water sector, first, desalination and water treatment are the 2 energy-intensive processes. In the water sector, for instance, renewables-based desalination has become most viable adaptation option, especially in small-scale projects. While water scarcity is a crucial issue in many countries' adaptation plans, 8 countries have already specifically mentioned desalination technologies paired with renewable energy in the adaptation target of their NDC submissions. Another is solar and wind-powered systems for water purification. In developing countries, decentralized solar or wind-powered water purification systems are the most cost-effective solutions than more cost-effective solutions than fossil fuels or grid-connected system. Increasingly, solar companies have already started to provide integrated solar water solutions that desalinate brackish groundwater on small scale. Similarly, in the agricultural sector, a broad range of renewable energy technologies are available to advance adaptation throughout the food system. The most obvious and common type of project would be irrigation generated by renewable energy technology. In particular, decentralized energy solutions can provide affordable energy for irrigation pumping and post-harvesting processing, which in turn can create additional employment opportunities for those living in remote areas with water infrastructure that has not been yet developed. Also, renewable energy technologies can be utilized for food processing, as post-harvesting losses is a big issue in most of developing countries. Various kinds of technologies, including solar, wind, bioenergy, and geothermal, can be used. Agricultural drying, milk pasteurization, fish drying using renewable energy are already well-established practices in many countries. Last is disaster response. A record-breaking number of heat-related mortality and natural disasters are being reported around the world. And natural disaster response necessitates a cross-sectoral resilience building and recovery measures. Renewables can help reduce the vulnerability of societies to the impacts of disasters by enabling provision of water, food, and other public services. In addition, decentralized energy systems as a self-reliant power system can provide more resilient power supply and protect critical infrastructure after extreme weather events. As we can see, there are multi-sectoral challenges that can be interlinked with several mitigation efforts. A cross-sectoral integration adaptation approach enables renewable energy to maximize its presence as a green infrastructure that is conducive to the environment. On top of energy services, energy-related benefits, it is also worth noting that renewables can have multifunctional impact as they deliver both energy-related services and often non-energy services as well. In regions where adaptation needs for non-energy services are high, these services can validate the implementation of renewable energy projects. So just to provide you a few examples, for instance, hydro dams in many cases would not have been built without intent to provide flood prevention, water storage, irrigation, and inland waterway navigation. A biogas plant built to produce electricity for cooking and water heating has multiple additional benefits, such as treatment of wastewater, which can be used as fertilizer. Also, offshore wind farm foundations may work as artificial reefs, providing a surface to which shellfish can catch. That may in turn increase the number of fish and marine animals that feed on them, creating biological hotspots. So this table summarizes multifunctionality of renewable energy solutions focused on adaptation, but I think the screen is quite far from everyone, so I recommend taking a second look at later the actual report. So now we have seen illustration of examples of renewables used in adaptation, and this section identifies the current state and major gaps and challenges in climate adaptation planning and financing frameworks. So as we can see here, the analysis of international and national documents such as the NDCs and NAPs show how countries have already started to include using renewables in their adaptation planning beyond impact on mitigation. So this figure shows the number of NDCs with adaptation components. So the blue bars show countries that have submitted NDCs. The green bars show countries that have submitted adaptation components or targets. So you can see the majority of countries have now included adaptation components in their NDCs. The orange bars show the countries that have included renewable energy technologies in their adaptation component. You can see that many countries have already started. So altogether, 64 countries have already mentioned renewables in their adaptation components of the NDCs as a technological option for climate resilience in various sectors. The findings show that sub-Saharan African countries and small island developing states, SIDS, particularly stand out for their specificity in needs and plans to use renewables. So as such, leveraging synergies between renewables and other sectors has great importance for these countries, and good examples can definitely be shared amongst them. So additionally, this table illustrates the ways countries include renewables specifically in NDCs, but you'll be able to see the long table in the report. The report illustrates all the countries that have indicated renewables as a solution for adaptation. So in terms of financing renewable-based adaptation, the landscape of climate finance is rapidly developing and growing in volume, and pledges to support adaptation and resilience have significantly increased in amount. The role of public actors and finance facilitating this structural change has been emphasized because adaptation is often associated with public goods and services. Our analysis shows that we had looked at the projects that have been approved between the year 2010 to 20 by Adaptation Fund, and projects that have been approved by Green Climate Fund between year 2015 to 2020. And there are, of all the approved adaptation projects, for adaptation funds, 42 had included some level of renewable energy technologies, and for the projects that have been approved by Green Climate Fund, 60% of the total had included were cross-cutting projects that cover both adaptation and mitigation. Other streams of funding emerged from development finance, including the private financing. Private actors such as corporations, banks, and insurers have begun to implement adaptation as a commercial and purely private activities as well. So investment in climate resilience is already being made by private sector in form of insurance for risk mitigation and as forms of debt and equity without being necessarily labeled as climate adaptation. A number of adaptation-focused mechanisms propelling private finance in renewable-based adaptation is listed in the box below. IRENA has also started to take actions on the ground to support adaptation-focused projects. There are several initiatives, including the Climate Investment Platform, the CIP, which has been developed in partnership with UNDP, C4All, and GCF. So I would like to take this opportunity to quickly highlight some of our activities. For instance, recently we have been supporting Empower Her initiative led by UNDP. supporting renewable energy projects, which are mostly linked to clean cooking and forest conservation, which delivers adaptation benefits to the communities. Also, we have been focusing a lot on supporting projects located in cities. Many of the projects are focused on delivering adaptation benefits, including water desalination, solar pumping, and waste treatment. So in order to leverage the financing mechanism, foster synergistic linkages and mainstream climate adaptation efforts using renewable energy options, it is essential that all elements I presented be aligned and integrated into climate adaptation decision-making process. I would like to, for the way forward, I would like to invite our panelists today to further discuss how frameworks around adaptation initiatives can be strengthened and how we can further mobilize finance targeted toward adaptation today. You will be able to, I think we will be distributing the reports in English and French for the participants of this event today, and also you'll be able to find the reports in 2 languages on our IRENA website. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jin Kyung. Before I give the floor to my other colleague, Tariq, I was notified that a 5th distinguished panelist was managed to join our session due to some technical details with a slight delay. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Franklin Kofi Gebedei from the African Development Bank, who is leading the Desert to Power initiative and brings his wide-ranging experiences in managing and financing projects in Africa. So thank you for joining us. And now I give the word to my colleague Tariq to start moderating the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elise, for the introduction and opening remarks. And thank you, my colleague Jin Kyung, also for this comprehensive presentation, which lays the ground for our discussion today. I would like first to say good afternoon to everyone and welcome our distinguished panelists, the audience, for their interest and allocating time to be with us today. As my colleague introduced me, my name is Tariq Ahmed. I am Program Officer at IRENA at the Project Facilitation and Support Division. And I am leading the Climate Investment Platform from IRENA side, because the Climate Investment Platform itself is a joint initiative between IRENA, UNDP, SE for All, and in coordination with the Green Climate Fund. So with that, we plan to do this panel discussion to discuss about the climate, the perspective of climate finance institutions, development financial institutions, the technical financial advisory services providers, and regional and local players in the private sector, to discuss about how we can coordinate and tackle these issues of adaptation in the cross-cutting between renewable energy and how we can enhance the resiliency. So without further ado, I will start with the questions. We're all looking forward to hear from our distinguished panelists. I will start with a question to Dr. Chris from GCF. So we know that public funding is a paramount component of the international architecture for renewable energy finance. And IRENA finding from this report, it shows that there is increasing inflows of investment being directed to adaptation, but in most cases, renewable energy is not acknowledged to be the main, one of the main things that tackles the adaptation. Considering the potential of renewable energy as presented here as adaptation measure, it is important that to inform and disseminate the knowledge about renewable energy technologies and their impacts towards adaptation initiatives. In this regard, Dr. Chris, I want to ask you to share some of the major and best practices and lessons learned from your experience and GCF perspective, financing adaptation projects that at cross-cut or benefit from renewable energy intervention. And also, how do you foresee renewable energy as a component that helps to overcome the current challenges while integrating the financing of mitigation and adaptation at that venture?
Okay, thank you. So my name is Chris Dickinson, and I work as an ecosystem management specialist at the Green Climate Fund. So I'm not an energy expert, but I work in sustainable landscapes. So more and more, as we look at forests, ecosystems, and agriculture, there is a link to energy. With ecosystem services, it could be provision of water for hydropower, and agriculture, we see the dependence on grids, energy for food storage, food processing, and for adaptation. And we also see links to biomass and cook stoves as a driver of deforestation or forest degradation. Especially in Africa, it's very important. And it's a very good question because energy generation has often been seen as displacing. It's been entirely a mitigation question, but it's becoming more and more related to adaptation. So in terms of the best practices and challenges, GCF has an obligation to develop 50% of its portfolio as mitigation and 50% as adaptation. And we're currently at about 48% adaptation and 52% mitigation. But mitigation projects have been asked more and more to consider themselves as cross-cutting projects that help benefit communities and resilience. And some examples we have are, for example, in Zambia, you see, for example, hydropower sector is very dependent upon water supplies, is affected by drought, so the diversification of the energy sector. So move towards solar power or other applications. There's also resilience is needed for energy for farmers and health, etc. Some of the key lessons that we're looking at is that activities like biomass cook stoves are maybe only a short-term solution for adaptation and for resilience of communities. We need to look at the longer term, whether it's electricity or gas or renewable energy or mini-grids. We also see, for example, the need to have cooling services for agricultural cooperatives as the temperatures are getting very high, and we've seen India, Pakistan, temperatures of, is it 52 to 60 degrees this last month. Cooling becomes more and more important, and there's a World Bank cooling project that was funded in World Bank and GCF fund cooling project in 4 continents with a total amount of money, okay, I'll tell you later, I think it's $157 million from GCF and a total of $880 million is looking at strengthening the resilience of agricultural food chains. And one of the sectoral pathways that we have in the agricultural food sector is reconfiguring food systems, not only like behavior change of moving towards less meat-based diets, but also looking at circular economy and also improving food storage is very, very important. I think figures are about 30% of the world's food is waste at, all along the value chain, from the farmer side to also the consumer side in the supermarket. And food waste is one of the big GHG emission sources. Another good example of best practice is the African Development Bank Desert to Power GCF funded project in the Sahel, which is looking at developing solar as energy for farmers and for mini-grids, for health and for adaptation purposes. And one that I've been involved in particularly is developing the IFAD and Green Climate Fund iGreenFin project, which is currently working the financial model in 5 countries, but will expand to further 8, sorry. And this is going to be supporting smallholder farmers and enterprises in both adaptation mechanisms, such as climate-smart agriculture, but also in energy to help provide energy supplies for storage, for processing, and for reducing food waste and making communities more resilient to food insecurity, which arises with climate change. So there's some examples, and it's very good that we can start to consider renewables included as adaptation components for long-term development strategies of people around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chris. This is really very insightful, and since you touched on the initiative that you worked with the African Development Bank on the Sahel region, let me jump to Mr. Franklin. So, Mr. Franklin, one of the most relevant inputs the IRENA report offered is that it highlighted the critical need for coordination effort to create synergy and complementarity in renewable energy projects that seeks to address adaptation climate risks. So the action of development finance institutions entail the interaction between a broad range of stakeholders brought together to pursue renewable energy projects. As such, I would like to invite you to share with the audience the coordination strategies that the African Development Bank utilizes as part of its financing process of renewable energy at the intersection between climate change mitigation and adaptation.
Thank you, Terry. Maybe before answering the question, I will give an overview about the Desert to Power facility. The Desert to Power initiative first is a flagship initiative of AFDB. The objective is to help Sahel countries in Africa to harness their solar potential. So in Africa, we have 11 countries, Sahel countries, which are Mauritania, Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Nigeria, Sudan, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea. So these countries are our focus in terms of developing the solar potential in Africa. So in that context, we prepare a framework instrument called Desert to Power Facility to focus on the G5 Sahel countries first. So the facility is around $1 billion US. 150 million is coming from GCF, as I mentioned earlier, and the remaining is coming from AFDB, public and private sector windows, and also from development partners, and a big chunk of it is also coming from the private sector. So it's a kind of blended finance strategy we use to make sure that all the stakeholders, everybody is involved in the financing of this facility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that shows a lot of effort already being done from the finance sector to tackle these issues. But now let's move to from developers' perspective, like the regional and local developers' perspective. So let me now ask Mr. Mahman, Mr. Mahman, in our climate investment platform experience, we know the importance of the project preparation level to be able to attract financial institutions' interest and to attract capital. So what what we know now from the coordination and the work that we've done so far, it's not the biggest problem that the capital is not there. The capital is there, but they are looking for kind of more bankable and investor-ready kind of projects. So I would like you to share with us some of the efforts that normally your organization is doing to be more ready to prepare the project documentation in a way that it touches on that, and if you've done any projects at this intersection between the mainly renewable energy that tackles adaptation impacts.
Okay, thank you very much, Tariq, for the questions, and good afternoon to everyone. So before jumping directly to the subject and answering your question, just to give you a quick overview of what we do EDF in regard of the region. So we are involved on large-scale infrastructure projects as solar plant, developing solar plants, biomass plant, and hydro plants. But we are also involved on trying to addressing new models like solar home system or solar pump, focusing on irrigation for small farmers. So it just gives you a range on the different size of project and the different approaches that we are considering to try to play a role regarding the different issues. So now jumping to your question, I think you mentioned two very important words, and it was also, I think, mentioned in one of the objectives of the Desert to Power project. What we are facing, I think, is that there is somehow a lack of preparation on the project, and for us, private sectors, this leads to a very high rate of failures on projects, but also when projects are moving forward, it takes a very, 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 very long time. And it means that we need, like you mentioned, to focus on some specific key components of project to make sure that we are reaching to a global success. Also, one thing that I want to mention is that to make sure that the projects go forward, we need to align the interest of the three main stakeholders, so private sectors, of course, public sectors, but also more and more institutions. In our vocabulary inside EDF, we are not anymore calling project public-private partnership. We are including them. We are also including institutions because they are playing a very important role on the development of those projects. As we can see what AFDB is doing regarding the Desert to Power, or as we can see what IFC is doing regarding scanning solar. So in order to tackle all this I would say challenges, some of the measures we can consider is first of all to make sure that we measure the effective impacts of renewable energy projects and their consistency with the policies and objectives set by governments and organizations. For example, when we are talking about renewable energy and especially solar, we need to manage the issue of the intermittency of solars, as most of the country we are here needs to reinforce the capacity in terms of generations, mainly on the base load. So it means that when we are considering renewable like solar, it's important also to make sure that it matches with the needs of the end users, but also of the government. It's also very important to make sure that there is an acceptance by local communities and the nature of their involvement. It means that we need to make sure that they are involved in the process, operation and maintenance. And when we are considering one of our biomass projects, we are not able to make this project if local communities are not involved in the fuel to supply and biomass logistic process. For instance, on this project, we are addressing this fuel supply chain involving more than 10,000 outgrowers. Also, one of the issues is the economic equations, because what is expected from government is to have, of course, a sustainable energy efficiency, but also at the best competitive price. And for that, we believe that it's really important to try to include, especially regarding this region, some subsidized or financial mechanism that can give more robustness on the economic model of those projects. And also, we need to pay attention about the existence of truly climate adaptation friendly government policies. So going back to the frameworks and to the regulatory frameworks, and also regarding large-scale projects, to anticipate what will be the transferring of assets after the operation period. So that will be, for the moment, my first contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think with that also, I want to hear from Mr. Ugu more about the local perspective on that, and what would be the challenges that you see, especially that, just I want to mention that Mr. Ugu, the project that one of the projects that he led is also kind of, it is registered at our climate investment platform, and we have provided some support to it. So Mr. Ugu, the floor is yours, and you feel free to speak in French if more convenient.
Merci beaucoup. Ce projet dont vous parlez, il faudrait que je le situe assez rapidement. C'est l'utilisation des déchets de cacao. Déchets de cacao s'entend tout ce qui est cortex de cacao, les coquilles qu'on laisse en brousse, et puis le bois de cacaoyer qui est arrivé en fin de vie économique, utiliser tout ça pour pouvoir produire donc de l'électricité. Ce projet aujourd'hui est dans sa phase d'étude qui est terminée. On attend quelques signatures administratives pour pouvoir commencer à regrouper les fonds et puis démarrer. Alors, pourquoi ces projets-là, ce genre de projet peuvent attirer un investisseur ou susciter de l'intérêt? Susciter de l'intérêt à la fois pour la population locale, susciter à la fois de l'intérêt aussi pour les gouvernements, et susciter l'intérêt pour ceux qui mettent l'argent là-dedans parce qu'il faut qu'ils en gagnent. Ce projet de Divo, il a suscité de l'intérêt parce qu'il s'est montré, au risque de paraître un peu immodeste, il s'est montré complet et solide. Complet parce qu'il a adressé plusieurs angles. Par exemple, l'angle de la reforestation partielle. J'ai entendu dans cette conférence, depuis maintenant 2 jours que ça a commencé, qu'on en parlait beaucoup d'agroforesterie. Mais l'agroforesterie, me semble-t-il, dans notre cas, n'est pas faisable s'il n'y a pas 3 triptyques. La première chose, c'est d'abord d'encadrer. La deuxième chose, c'est de financer. La troisième chose, c'est d'être capable de pouvoir contrôler. Et c'est ça que nous avons mis ensemble dans ce projet d'IVO et qui a fait sa spécificité et puis son attrait. La deuxième chose aussi que nous avons fait ressortir, c'est sa dimension d'utilisation des déchets de telle sorte qu'on puisse réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre qui peuvent provenir de la décomposition des déchets agricoles. Quand on utilise du cortex de cacao, c'est quoi? C'est qu'on évite qu'on puisse émettre du méthane. Et le méthane est un gaz à effet de serre qui est 25 fois plus puissant que le CO2. La troisième chose que nous avons mise en exergue, c'est la transformation des déchets de cette usine de production d'électricité en valeur. Les cendres qui sortent de cette usine comportent 47,6% de potassium. Le potassium, c'est un des éléments essentiels de notre engrais NPK. Donc, on a de la valeur locale, il faut l'utiliser pour en faire un élément qui puisse permettre de fertiliser nos sols et augmenter la productivité. Et c'est ça que nous avons fait. Deuxième chose que nous avons faite aussi, le fait que cette unité de production d'engrais qui sera complètement séparée de l'unité de production de l'électricité est petite, elle va faire 71 000 tonnes d'engrais par an, elle a la flexibilité nécessaire pour pouvoir s'adapter à la demande spécifique de quelqu'un. Mettons qu'une coopérative de Korogo vienne me commander 500 tonnes d'engrais pour aller fertiliser son coton. Mais la première des réactions que j'ai d'abord, c'est de pouvoir savoir quel sol cet engrais va fertiliser. Un sol acide n'a pas les mêmes besoins qu'un sol qui ne l'est pas. Donc cette flexibilité nous permet de faire une adaptation spécifique aux besoins des gens. Et c'est ça que le projet d'Ivo a mis au point. Et nous espérons que véritablement les décisions administratives seront assez rapidement prises pour qu'on passe à la phase d'implémentation, parce qu'aujourd'hui, je parle sur le contrôle de Jean-Jacques, hein, parce qu'aujourd'hui le projet est véritablement prêt. Donc, ce que je voulais dire, c'est que dans une expérience comme celle-là, tant que vous y êtes, tant qu'on est au cœur du sujet, il faut regarder véritablement tous ces aspects. Que ce soit les aspects agricoles, que ce soit les aspects environnementaux, que ce soit les aspects agricoles, que ce soit aussi les effets locaux. Et M. Marmon le disait tout à l'heure, un projet comme ça, vous ne pouvez pas conduire sans que vous fassiez une synergie avec les populations locales. Le rejet de ce projet par ces populations locales, c'est la fin du projet. Aussi. Donc voilà, dans ce premier stade, ce que je voulais vous faire partager.
Thank you very much. This is very insightful, and I think this is exactly what we are looking at, like project that combines many elements and touches on many elements, and it's of course needs a kind of a great deal of collaboration and a great deal of help. Maybe just one follow-up question before we go to Mr. Ngunu. I would like you just to highlight one or two challenges that you see as the main bottlenecks in the way of the development till you reach this level of readiness. What could it be? And then we can go for Mr. Ngunu for further elaboration on how the solution would be.
Oui, les obstacles, je veux dire, aujourd'hui, ils ne sont pas techniques. Les obstacles ne sont pas financiers. Les obstacles, c'est, disons ça, hein, c'est la rapidité de la décision administrative. Dans la conduite de ce projet, on a perdu, appelons ça comme ça, 2 ans et demi, quasiment, à cause de la décision administrative qui n'est pas rapidement prise. Mais ces décisions seront prises et on pourra avancer. Le deuxième obstacle qu'il faut véritablement franchir, et ça, on l'a bien réussi, c'est d'être capable de se fondre dans le milieu dans lequel on travaille. Ne pas chercher à passer des camisoles de force à des gens. Prendre le temps de convaincre, prendre le temps d'expliquer, prendre le temps de dire, c'est un projet, ce sont des enjeux qui sont gagnants-gagnants. D'un côté, je vous prends votre biomasse, je l'achète. De l'autre côté, je transforme ça en valeur haute. Et puis après, l'effet de ruissellement va faire que vous et moi, nous allons changer. Que vous et moi, nous allons gagner. Regardez par exemple dans notre cas, il y a la question qui se pose du renouvellement du verger cacaoyer. Mais ce n'est pas parce que les gens n'ont pas envie de renouveler le verger cacaoyer. Tout le monde sait que le verger cacaoyer, tout le monde sait qu'un cacaoyer, il a un temps de vie économique. Mais vous trouvez aujourd'hui dans le verger de l'endroit où nous sommes des pieds d'arbres qui ont 51 ans. Ce n'est pas parce que les gens n'ont pas envie de le faire, mais tout simplement parce que la ressource nécessaire n'est pas là. Qu'est-ce que nous faisons? Nous rachetons les vieilles plantations. Et l'argent du rachat de ces vieilles plantations permet de les renouveler point par point. Point par point. Mais ça, c'est la question de la compréhension de ce qu'il manque et une réponse à pouvoir leur apporter. Donc, être dans le milieu, épouser les habitudes, mais ne pas en faire complètement sa première culture et dire, OK, nous apportons des solutions nouvelles, ensemble, qu'est-ce que nous devons faire pour que cette solution-là soit profitable à nous tous? C'est ça que nous avons réussi dans cette première étape. C'était un des obstacles majeurs. Quand on commençait, moi j'en avais peur, mais on a réussi à le faire parce qu'on n'a plus le temps de pouvoir l'expliquer. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much for that. And with that, let me go to Mr. Onguno. Mr. Onguno, we all know that the participation of non-state, in addition to what Mr. Ogu mentioned about the challenges that is facing normally the project development. So, but also the role of private sector and non-state actors support to deployment of climate agenda is increasingly important to meet the international net zero goal by 2050. So, as you are and your organization is on ground working with projects in their development and then also reaching out to financial institutions at that intersection, I would like you to take us through specific mechanisms and financial products that you supported that offer help to the renewable energy interventions focused on climate adaptation.
Thank you very much, Tariq, and thank you again to IRENA to give me the opportunity to speak today here. And Chris, I think you, as a GCF, you should have a closer look on this project, Southern One. I think it's a huge project with a very positive impact. Maybe before I answer your question, Tariq, I just want to remind to everybody here about FanoGreen. We are a financial advisory company. We do focus only on renewable energy. I mean, all transition energy projects. Overall, on the world, I think we have about 11 offices everywhere. And in Africa, we have about 3 offices here in Abidjan, in Nairobi, and Cape Town in South Africa. So we do cover all sub-Saharan Africa for those 3 offices. And we do work with all partners. Could be public one, could be local one, and we are trying to work with everybody in order to find a financial solution and in order to make project happen. With government, for instance, we do provide different kind of services. It could be maybe creating new product like we did with Senegal in order to create maybe a dedicated fund for renewable energy in Senegal. We worked with Francis a couple of years ago. We are working a lot with IRENA on different topics in order to find solutions for countries, for developers. We work also with the private sector. We are advising projects, the one with Ogo Just Speak. We work also with international company like EDF or maybe maybe international company. So we are working with them in order to find solution. You know, there is not only one way to finance a project. There is different way. As my man just mentioned, it's also about project preparation. And in terms of project preparation, we work with private sector, with public sector, on the consultancy basis, in order to make sure that the projects meet with all criteria needed for any country, for any financiers. Could be equity financer or could be debt providers. So it takes a lot of time to develop a project, to reach the commissioning of any project. And we are here as FanoGreen in order to support all that stakeholders in order to have more renewable energy projects. In addition to our advisory / consultancy maybe services, we also started a couple of years ago. Modestly, we raised about a small maybe fund that aim at supporting maybe early stage projects. We raised about 10 million in order to support at the development stage. It's where funds is needed. It's like a project preparation, maybe funds. It's a private initiative. We raised 10 million that is fully invested, and we managed to maybe to do about 8 investments and it's for a total of more than 500 megawatts, and in 10 countries in Africa. We are currently continue supporting that project here, and I think it will benefit a lot on the sponsor, but also at the country level. In addition to this early stage, maybe capital we do provide to project, we are currently working on providing debt solution at the construction phase for ready projects in order to accelerate the construction phase of renewable energy projects. And as you mentioned, Tariq, I think there is a lot to do in Africa, and renewables play a lot of role on adaptation. And I think that Fana Green, as a private company, and trying to play a big role on that space, not only in Africa but in the world, because we have also a face in South America, in Asia, and everywhere.
Thank you very much. With that, let me just have a couple of follow-ups. Maybe I can start with GCF and African Development Bank. Just reflecting on what mentioned by Mr. Mahaman and Mr. Ugu on the challenges that they face with kind of the regulatory frameworks, the government, the obstacles that is just a little bit beyond the private sector developers. So how the financial, like the development financing institutions and climate financing institutions tackle that? Maybe I can start with you, Dr. Chris, on how this is designed in your project documents, or how you kind of try to tackle that when dealing with these kind of issues.
Okay, thank you. Good question. Technical requirements can be a big challenge, but many of the GCF projects also have not only risk financing for institutions to implement the activity, but they also have technical assistance grants for training, for capacity building. We have GCF readiness grants for countries to help build the enabling capacity in the country. I think there's $1 million per year allowed for the national focal point to assign to the most priority aspects in the country. So this could be used for building the enabling environment for energy technical assistance and for linking it into adaptation. Perhaps also there's a need for energy experts to also work together very closely with agriculture, forestry and land use teams. We've started to do this at GCF. We have regular meetings with the energy team, but maybe also AFDB, they're doing the same thing in the development of their projects and challenges. And it also suggests that the private sector developers also take on board more adaptation expertise and planning inside the energy development projects.
Thank you. Mr. Franklin?
Yes, thank you, Tariq. What we are doing in AFDB is to provide technical assistance to governments and also utilities to address the bottlenecks in terms of regulation and laws to make sure that they are conducive to private sector investments. One example is the Desert to Power facility. In that facility, we are providing 10 million grants to 5 countries. And the objective is to address all these issues which create bottlenecks during the development of private sector's projects such as IPPs. We are focused on IPPs. So I think that what we are doing now, we are also helping utilities to make sure that they are financially sound, because if, for example, there is an IPP project in a country, the off-taker is mainly the utility. So if the utility is not in good shape financially, it's a big risk to the country. So to to be able to address this risk, we provide what we call partial risk guarantee, but also we provide technical assistance to the utility to make sure that all these questions are properly addressed.
Thank you very much. And is it like this type of technical assistance also approachable from private sector? Like if private sector would require some type of technical assistance as well, not in the regulations, but just in the preparation of their projects, or is there any facility that AFDB targeted to private sector that working in the Sahel region? Or
Yeah, in terms of private sector support, what we can provide is resources to make sure that the preparation studies are well conducted. And we have some examples now where AFDB is funding the feasibility studies and also the environmental and social impact assessments, and make sure that all these questions are addressed before the private sector come in.
thank you very much. So let me just also have final thoughts from Mr. Muhammad on, we know, like, private sector, in order for its own sustainability, they are looking for profit. But within that, there is a great room for direction towards tackling specific issues that, like that, what we are speaking about, the adaptation impacts of renewable energy in Sahel region. Do you have any strategic objectives or strategic milestones that is set within the organization that, because this is what the external people will be looking at. So if you can share with us any feedbacks on this.
Yes, for sure. I can give you two examples of that. One on I would say large-scale project. If I talk about our biomass project, so we have a biomass project called BioVea in partnership with Meridiam and Sifka. It's a 46 megawatt project based in east of Ivory Coast. We intend to transform the palm oil leaves into energy. So we have reached financial close end of last year, and we have started one of the construction work regarding the electrical substations infrastructure. So on this project, we managed to reach from Proparco and AFD, but also from EAIF, 13 million euro subsidy. Why? It was a part of the element that was presented from Mr. Ogu. First, because the impact of the project on the outgrowers, on the local economy is important, because on this project we were talking about how to include the rural population on those projects. One of the key elements of this project is how we are going to collect the biomass. We are talking about 500,000 of tons of biomass that needs to be collected and transported to the future plants. And in order to do so, we are going to rely on existing outgrowers, around more than 10,000. So it means that it will create for them additional revenue. It will create jobs. So it will have a huge impact on their life, and it will include them in the process of building a power plant, renewable power plant, but also at the same time supporting in a way the agro-industry sector. So that's what convinced some of our institutions, partners to play a big role on this project. But why did they do it? Also, it was coming back to one of the points that I was mentioning, is that the government of Ivory Coast was willing, interesting and pushing to develop those kind of projects. It's a first of a kind project but there is an economic equation that needs to be solved. Government wants renewable energies, but they want it at the best price affordable for them. It has to be sustainable also in the balance of the electrical sectors. And it is also one of the key points. You were mentioning the supports to utilities, and that is key. If we want to boost the development of renewable energy projects, we need absolutely to solve the issue of the financial situation of utilities, because it's not sustainable for us, a private company, to sell electricity at a certain tariff, and that at the end of the day, the end users, the price that is giving to the utilities is not enough to cover the expenses, the chargings, but also the investment that will come. So it's really important to try. I'm not saying that this is something that needs to be solved, I will say directly, but it's important to take a trajectory in which most of the country are trying to have a balanced energy sector in order to support the coming investment regarding the renewable energy. So that was one of the first examples referring to the very classic IPP schemes, but something I would like to highlight that's a very difficulty. I think it's not normal for a developer like EDF, but it's the same of other developers, that we are spending more than 10 years preparing a project, investing millions of euros. We are talking about almost 10 million euros only from our pocket to prepare a project. And we are, during these 10 years, at all risk. And we are, during this preparation phase, also supporting government, supporting institutions to put in place the right framework. Referring to the biomass project, for instance, there were no regulations on how to treat the smokes coming from the biomass plants. And so we were the one discussing, advising, pushing the Ministry of Environment of Côte d'Ivoire to establish the proper framework that was necessary to move forward on the project. One of the other approach that we have, because we know that it's really difficult to structure from private sectors, public sector, but also institutions, the large-scale projects. So we know that it's difficult, and that all together we are trying to push in the same direction. So we have decided to also focus on new models in which we were directly addressing the issues of rural population. So that's why 5 years ago we have decided to launch a project that we call ZESI. It's a project in which we are deploying, and we have already deployed more than 5,000 solar home system solutions that contribute to rural electrifications with relying on solar panels, batteries, lights, fans, and also we are providing this solution, giving a credit. And on this project, we were happy to be strongly supported by AFDB to help us to structure the credits that give to the end users a 3 years plan to reimburse the value of the solar home system. And we are going to launch on the same model, what we call pay-as-you-go, a very large scale in the next coming weeks, a new company that will deploy in the large scale schemes some solar pump for the irrigation. So, and on those projects, because we are directly impacting positively the life or the economic activities of our end users, we are also able to find some fundings. For instance, we have signed 2.5 million euro facility subsidy that will help us to better deploy and at a more affordable price the solar pump solution that I was describing and that we are going to launch on the next coming month. That's just to give you some overview of course we are here not to lose money. We have some now very controlled rentability because now when we are negotiating with government, it's becoming, like I said, it's a partnership So it's becoming more and more open book. So it means that what we are focused on is to be a partner in the energy transition. It's to be a partner on how we are going to develop the energy sector, because we were talking about many impacts today, but you still have in Ivory Coast and in most of the country in Africa, less than 1 people on 2 that doesn't have access to energy. And this is one of our target and objective to try to support that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is very impressive, actually. So I think we all agreed that the role of coordination is vital, and to bring all these stakeholders, be it from private sector, public sector, government, international organizations, is quite important. So my last question goes to Mr. Ngunu, how the private sector financing advisory services companies like Finagreen is trying to also be in that role, or what efforts that they are doing.
Thank you, Tariq. Maybe to complement what my man just said, I think we just need to remind that at some point, most of the effort started 6 years ago at the COP21 in Paris. We need to just to remind everybody that African countries took a lot of maybe commitment in order to improve the energy mix in their countries, and a lot has been done so far. We need to be, that is the first thing, and a lot of things has been implemented with the support of international communities in many countries in Africa. Finagreen is working in more than 30 countries in Southern Africa. But it's a lot of effort that is doing by a lot of government, as it is not easy. But we just need to congratulate all the countries for the effort that has been done so far. But obviously, it remains a lot that needs to be done. It's about coordination. It's about coordination, and maybe we need to double our efforts, our common effort, private sector, public sector, international organization, because changing things takes a lot of time, We need to continue that effort with maybe institutions like GCF need to give money faster. IRENA, who is supporting the private sector and public sector need to continue that effort. I think we are going in the right direction. I can see the difference between 2016 when I start this business in Africa and today. It's just different things, and definitely. And the way we are going now, it's what my man said, we need planification. And I think it's just a mess to say that someone spent about 10 years spending a lot of money in development, and is going to be stuck at signing the PPA, getting paid to and reimburse the debt. And it's all about the planification. If a country needs a project, it needs to be planified, and we need to be sure that the off-taker it's financially well balanced, and that it will pay the electricity is getting provided. And also, it's about doing some effort in order to include a bit more local banks. Local banks are not part of financials of renewable energies here because of the market condition, and it's really difficult for off-grid and on-grid projects, to get financing at the right condition for projects here. And we talk a lot about adaptation. Local banks know quite well the local ecosystem, and we are missing something if we don't find a solution to involve more local banks who know local ecosystem in financing renewable energy in Africa. I talk about Côte d'Ivoire. We can say the same for Uganda, for maybe Namibia. Everywhere we work, it's the same situation. It's difficult to get financing from local banks. The only way we can get good financing is from international, maybe communities, and it takes time. And that is quite normal. It's huge institution, it's long process, etc., with some criteria. It takes a lot, for a single solar project, it's about 2 years, doesn't make sense. You know, in France, where we finance some projects, it takes us about 6 months to get financing. You know, it's huge as a difference. You know, and definitely, I think the way we should work, in just to give a quick conclusion, to work on coordination, on maybe planification with the public sector, at the country level, and trying to find a way at the private sector to see how we can involve a bit more local banks in financing in local currency projects in Africa.
Thank you very much. So I think with that we kind of reach our end, but I'll give just a brief chance for everyone to give a final notes before we give the floor to the audience to also ask some questions. So let me start with Dr. Chris.
Okay, thank you. Just a final comment to say that we look forward to working with access entities, especially direct access entities and future development banks. As a gentleman said, we should work with national development banks to develop new projects with you, and we have you contact your country focal points, and we look forward to speaking with people later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mahmoud?
Yes, one thing that maybe so I totally agree with some of the conclusion that was shared by the different panelists. We need to better coordinate together, but by better coordinate together, we know each other, we know that how to work, but I think that's also something that needs to be improved is also, and this is of course coming from private sector perspective, but also in terms of how can we change a little bit the risk allocations between private, public, and institutions on how to finance projects. Because what we feel, private sectors, is that we are supporting a lot of risk, and of course because we are on, of course, area that needs to be developed, of course, the risk that we are taking is not all the time reflected on the rentability that we are expecting to do. But one of the break that makes that we are spending years and years of discussion on the documentation, financial documentations, is that sometimes we are spending a lot of money, a lot of efforts on I will say trying to push on others the risk. So I think we need to improve that aspect, and by better coordinations, I think we should also better coordinate in terms of risk allocation. So that was one of them.
Thank you very much. Mr. Franklin?
Yes, thank you. What I would like to say is that, as you know, the Desert to Power facility is our main target in AFDB. So the facility will start implementing this year. And what I would like to say here is that we are open to any collaboration from partners because we are still looking for private sector and public sector resources to make sure that we reach our target in terms of financing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is really very promising. So now let's go to Mr. Ongono.
Nothing more to say, just FANAGWIN will be happy to work with private sector, to continue to work with private sector and public sector and try to find financing solution in order to improve renewables stuff in Africa.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ugu?
Oui, je partage beaucoup ce qui a été dit avant, mais j'ajoute tout simplement que les initiatives peuvent être nombreuses, hein, et les opportunités, comme vous avez dit tout à l'heure, existent beaucoup, que ce soit dans le solaire, dans l'éolien, dans la biomasse. Que ce soit dans l'éolien, dans la biomasse. Mais il y a deux écueils qui sont des écueils principaux. Le premier écueil, c'est la question de la décision administrative et de sa célérité. Ça nous fait perdre beaucoup de temps, ça nous coûte beaucoup d'argent, ça nous donne beaucoup de sueur et quelquefois ça décourage les initiatives aussi. La deuxième chose, c'est le financement. Le financement des études, le financement de la mise en place des projets, les rendre bancables. Et il n'est pas toujours aisé, Jean-Jacques l'a rappelé tout à l'heure, qu'on puisse rassembler ces financements-là pour pouvoir mener ces actions de façon efficace. Et puis, troisième chose que j'ai envie d'ajouter, ça sera la dernière, c'est que la contribution des secteurs des énergies, là, comme ça, au changement climatique, c'est pas aussi par l'addition des initiatives locales, des initiatives dans tel ou tel secteur, et plus ça va se multiplier, et mieux ça vaudra pour l'Afrique et puis pour le monde aussi. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. It's been very interesting talking to you all. Thank you very much for your valuable inputs. Now I will turn the floor to the audience, distinguished audience. Please, if you have any questions to our panelists, please feel free to do so. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Cyril Bicom. I work with the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development in Nigeria. Let me start by thanking the organizers for giving us this platform, and of course the panelists for a very deep and incisive elaboration in their competencies or competent areas. However, I have some, would I say, observations or questions to ask. One, of course, you will agree with me that there's a huge gap in energy access in Africa and almost most of the countries, particularly in sub-Saharan countries in particular. Maybe I speak about my country, where I'm coming from. There's a huge gap, and particularly when I talk about the issue of the sector, food, agriculture, and forestry, there's a huge gap there, a huge population that over 70 to 80% are depending on agriculture or those sectors. And they need, like one of the speakers has already talked about, smart solutions for farmers or farming communities, smart solutions for even marketers, cooling innovations to be able to see. Otherwise, the huge loss will continue to deepen the poverty of the farming communities who, of course, who are they? They are actually the smallholder farmers that are resource poor. So what do we do in this respect? I also want to appreciate the fact that one of the speakers said they want to launch a program of about 5,000 solar pumps to drive that, which is a laudable initiative. Generally, like I said, Africa outside of the Sahara, to a greater extent, you realize that the agriculture is rain-fed, and which is driven by natural forces, and with the issue of impact of climate change, when the rain doesn't come, where is the farmer? There's nothing for him to produce. So I think it's key that we have this potential in the river systems, or most of the rivers that are available. And if the solar pumps are available to a greater extent, you discover that there will be a huge drive where irrigation or food production to a greater extent will be almost all year round. So I think it's important that we try to look at it. Then the other issue is when we talk about 10 years of funding a program for it to be able to kickstart. I think it's a huge gap where so much funds are lost along the way. So I begin to imagine, is it that there's lack of capacity in country? Is it that we have not been able to do a scoping? Is it that the templates we have for financing they are too complex and cannot be understood to a greater extent by who or the people that are supposed to develop such framework. Then if that is the situation, these finances are supposed to benefit the local people to a greater extent. Is it not possible that we begin to look at either GCF, is it AFDV, to look at a way that we'll be able to simplify these formats that, or templates that will enhance the in-country capacity to be able to reduce the timeline that they will be able to come up and be able to complete this issue of processing, or I don't know what to call it exactly. So I reduce the line, the timeline. After all, the end point is that it is the people that are supposed to benefit. So why do we make it so complex? And this goes around, cut across almost all the countries to a greater extent that it reduces the number of countries that are able to access these funds that at the long run, you spend 10 years, they are just financing the preparatory activities. I think we need to look at it there. Then I also want to speak about the issue of, for instance, using biomass. I think to a greater extent that before we are talking about the project to that extent, we need to do a kind of de-risking. We need to do a kind of scoping. There are a lot of biomass that are all over, for instance, my country. If you look at maybe the rice host, perhaps it's similar in other countries, where they have, for instance, maybe here in this country, the cocoa horse and some of them. First of all, we need to look at if we are citing such a renewal that will be using these raw materials, where is it that is hugely populated, so that the cost of and how many households or how many are the smallholders that are involved in the processing of these materials, so that to a greater extent it will reduce the cost of even transporting, it will reduce, because you should be able to map who are, what region, what are those areas, what are those communities that will be able to supply this input that is required. I want to I want to stop here and say thank you all.
Thank you very much. I think this is insightful comments that you provided. We all, I think, agree with you that the gap in energy access in sub-Saharan Africa is a huge thing, and that looking at these kind of solutions to touch on food, agriculture, forestry, and some smart solution for farmers, we totally agree with that. And I think just I might give the chance to Dr. Chris or okay, so Mahman.
Yeah, maybe on some questions, because you were asking why 10 years? What are the main reasons? Or there are many, but I share what Mr. Rogu say. First, the administration decisions. But we can understand it, because when you come on with a new technology or a new model, it's also important for the decision makers to have the right human capacity, of course, to understand exactly what you are going to propose as a project, and also to negotiate. So yeah, one of the main reasons was the decision of the administration. Of course, it was important and also in our interest to make sure that the customers, which is the government, was, I will say, in a good way, had all the capacity to negotiate and defend the interest of the government. Legal framework, because every time you come with a new sector, with a new technology, I will even say that I don't think it's even interesting trying to adapt the existing regulations to, I will say, renewable energy. Just to give you an example, today in Côte d'Ivoire, when we are developing a biomass project or a solar project, we have less incentive from, I will say, custom duties, but also tax. We have less advantages than the existing thermal project because they have tried some adaptation instead of having an approach saying that those projects are coming with different impacts, new impacts, and we should, I will say, implement a very specific regulation to those projects which are totally different. When we are talking about biomass, the fuel, it means that even when we are selling the kilowatt hours, we are not buying the gas or the fuel from outside Ivory Coast. We are using existing waste, and we are involving human resources based in Côte d'Ivoire in the process. So it means that even if it will have a cost, it will go back to the local economy. And so, legal framework was an issue, and also I'm insisting on this because we had 2 years of negotiation on what will be the proper tariff of electricity that needs to be sold. So what was the affordable tariffs for the government and on our side. We spent 2 years negotiating this part. And also on the risk analysis, I'm always coming back to this, but I will maybe answer this by a question. When we are considering a biomass project, you have to make sure that you have 1,000 tons of waste coming every day, 24/7 to the plant. Why? Because the kind of contract that you are signing are take or pay contracts. And I would like to ask you this question, not answering, who between private company that have experience building a power plant, government or institution should take the risk on not providing biomass. It means that the biomass will be provided by thousands of different farmers. But who between these two parties should take the risk of non-providing this biomass and so at the end of the day not providing the electricity? But yeah, so that was also part of what took a lot of time to structure between the different legal of the different three stakeholders that I was mentioning.
Thank you very much. I think we are a little bit short of time, but I want to give the other part of the question to Dr. Chris about the GCF and simplifying the processes to shorten the timelines for accessing finance. And then we can take another question.
Okay. So first of all, I'd like to say that I agree with the gentleman's comments about we need to look at integrated landscapes, forests, water, rivers, climate-smart agriculture for smallholder farmers, and these are going to be the fundamental basis of a community's adaptation strategy. Renewables is going to be integrated into that as well, but we need to look at integrated strategies for developing resilience for communities. With regards to GCF timelines, we are improving and getting faster all the time, and there is a process. We would encourage entities to read the guidelines and the sector guides when they are submitting concepts, and read the comments that we submit in response to an entity's submitting a proposal. Invariably, we get the second version of concept notes back, which have not taken into account any of the comments, which means we have to go back to the version number 3. So I would encourage, read the sector guides. There's one on energy, there's one on water, there's a really good one on climate information systems, agriculture, forests and ecosystems, and also cities, which is also important for renewable energy. And I think those can give an idea of what can be integrated into the concept notes and proposals. And we are improving and getting faster all the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I also noted that GCF has initiated the simplified application process for smaller projects.
Yeah, there's a simplified application process for projects up to 10 million. It's currently being reviewed, how to even streamline it and make it quicker. This is particularly important for direct access entities who are approved to access small amounts of money to facilitate climate adaptation mitigation projects.
Thank you very much. So we have additional 3 questions, I think. We can start from there, and then we come here.
Thank you so much. My name's Michael Orangi. I work for the Rainforest Alliance, coming from Kenya. I want to, first of all, appreciate the presentations that are really on point in terms of our approaches to renewable energy, and my concerns are actually 2. And before probably I raise the concerns, I want to agree with the gentleman that energy projects, especially biomass, they take quite substantial amount of time to design, do the risk, I mean, even get, you know, data on the availability of the biomass itself, and I agree, it takes a lot of time, and legal frameworks as well. I'm speaking from a practical point of view. We had funding in Kenya as Rainforest Alliance to do a biomass project. It really took quite like 3 years before it kicked off, and we had to ask for non-cost extensions from the donor, because getting the biomass, getting the legal framework, getting commitment from people, it takes quite a, even from companies, even whether it's government or private. One challenge that I find in terms of these renewable energy front, I hear a lot of course, of late, there's a lot of effort in governments trying to develop renewable energy strategies, combining both government and private efforts and financiers. And I'm really amused to hear a lot of funding opportunities from the panelists. But also, I recognize the fact that sometimes most people don't have a lot of information to these funding opportunities. Like the project that we were doing in Kenya, we wanted to have a central processing unit developed where companies that manufacture tea could get access to, for example, commercial briquettes to substitute in their boilers where they do a lot of, using wood fuel to fire up, get energy to dry the teas and what have you. But we didn't get any investor coming across to finance such a facility, so we had to fall back to available, manufacturers and kind of facilitate and work along with them. And as much as some of them are just far off the target project areas. For example, we were now targeting using bagasse to make commercial briquettes to at least incorporate with firewood in boilers so that they, because you go to tea factories, for example, in Kenya, they use massive amounts of firewood, and also even the households. And then I'll be curious to probably get one-on-one, especially with the African Bank and the GEF on those funding opportunities, because the project has come to an end, but we are like, even the factories at this point, they haven't still wholly, taken up this element of using briquettes together with firewood in their boilers. So a lot of that technology. And then my second question on that is, this kind of funding, is there targeted, for example, funding towards equipment? Because one thing I get of late is I hear somebody mentioned to me yesterday that there is a boiler that can burn any kind of biomass, whether it is wet, whether it is dry, and generate energy, like in mass, especially for large manufacturing companies. Do we have also funding towards those kind of massive investments in equipment-wise, so that such technologies can be uptaken by these massive sectors that use a lot of firewood in their boilers, for instance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to note that we have 3 minutes left. Maybe we'll hear from here and then just reflections on it.
Merci. Merci pour m'avoir donné la parole et je félicite beaucoup les différents orateurs en tout cas pour leur communication très riche. Alors je me présente, c'est M. Dambako Cheibou, je suis du Niger, je travaille au ministère du Plan et j'assure les services du plan focal opérationnel GF. Alors moi, mon problème, et je pense que certains l'ont dit ici, et le véritable problème, c'est d'abord vraiment la coordination, la collaboration et peut-être le manque de leadership institutionnel, que ce soit au niveau régional et au niveau des pays. Je m'explique. Et nous sommes tous ici, différentes institutions, gouvernement, secteur privé, et mécanismes de financement, tout. Alors, et moi, je participe à des travaux dans le cadre de l'accélérateur pour la Grande Muraille Verte. Je participe au niveau du partenariat CDN. Je participe au niveau de certaines coalitions dans le cadre des énergies. Alors, tout ça, je ne vois pas l'effort qu'on fait pour synchroniser tous nos efforts au niveau de ces différentes initiatives. Il n'y a pas un effort de synchronisation, de cohérence. Parce que pour moi, et tout à l'heure, mon frère de la BAD, en parlant du programme Desert for Power, il a cité les pays, mais tous ces pays-là, une semaine, on en a discuté des problèmes de dossiers bancables, de financement, dans le cadre de la Grande Muraille, parce que nous sommes tous des pays membres de la Grande Muraille Verte. Alors, moi, je pense que si une fois, on essaie de se retrouver tous ensemble, on prend nos différentes CDN, on a un plan d'investissement climat du Sahel. Nous avons un partenariat pour les CDN. Chaque pays a révisé sa CDN. Il y a des plans d'investissement qui ont été élaborés, avec des projets vraiment... Alors, tout ça, si on s'assoit, on s'organise, on élit des institutions, que ce soit du secteur privé, des banques, vraiment, qu'on va responsabiliser au niveau régional, au niveau national, on crée des coalitions, moi je pense qu'on peut réussir. Mais tant que chacun va essayer d'aller vraiment de son côté, mais on ne peut pas progresser. Moi je pense que c'est ça le véritable problème. Il faudrait qu'on change notre manière de travail. Le Niger a travaillé dans le cadre d'une initiative pilote, je m'excuse, juste une seconde, et dans le cadre du Fonds d'investissement climatique, le programme de résilience climatique PPCR, que vous connaissez tous. Alors, à la fin de cette initiative pilote, nous avons élaboré des notes conceptuelles qui ont été très participatives, inclusives, très riches, mais écrites sous le format fond vert. Aujourd'hui, quel que soit le mécanisme de financement, dans lequel, et quel que soit le secteur, tous les secteurs affectés, y compris l'énergie, la santé, nous avons des notes conceptuelles qu'il faut améliorer, exploiter pour avoir des dossiers. Donc, problème des dossiers bancables, pour moi, c'est parce qu'on ne collabore pas, on ne s'assoit pas autour des grandes initiatives que nous avons au niveau de nos pays. C'est comme ça qu'on peut vraiment être cohérent et vraiment chacun, on va surmonter tous les défis. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. I think we have already reached our end, but maybe if Mr. Franklin, do you want to just reflect back on the 2 questions?
Oui, mon frère, c'est quel nom? Du Niger, oui. Effectivement, je voudrais contribuer un peu à la discussion que tu as suscitée. Le cas du Niger est un cas que je connais un peu. Parce que j'ai eu à travailler sur beaucoup de projets d'énergie au Niger, surtout avec la Nigédec. Et même dans le cadre de la Grande Muraille Verte, nous avons initié actuellement un projet de ligne de transport. OK. de lignes de transport d'à peu près 6000 km qui va de Nouakchott jusqu'à N'Djamena et qui sera la plus longue ligne de transport en Afrique. Donc, comme tu l'as dit, il y a des efforts qui se font, mais la coordination, moi je la vois des deux côtés. Du côté des bailleurs, mais également du côté du gouvernement. Parce que ce qu'on a constaté, c'est que quand on est en discussion avec le gouvernement, dans le même temps, ouvre les mêmes discussions avec d'autres bailleurs. Donc, ce qui fait qu'il y a une forme de cacophonie qu'on observe parfois, et c'est entre bailleurs qu'on découvre que le gouvernement a soumis les mêmes requêtes à tous les bailleurs. Et donc, c'est un problème. Mais effectivement, comme vous l'avez dit, c'est important qu'il y ait cette coordination. Pour l'énergie, il y a un groupe énergie actuellement qui se réunit au moins une fois par mois au Niger, un groupe énergie composé des bailleurs de fonds du secteur. Mais ce qui est déplorable, c'est que le gouvernement n'est pas présent dans ce groupe. Donc, c'est les bailleurs qui se réunissent entre eux. Donc la balle aussi est dans le camp du gouvernement. Voilà, c'est ce que je voulais dire.
Si je peux me permettre, cher Aîné, moi je suis conseil en fait à Madagascar, de la présidence de Madagascar, et ça fait à peu près 5 ans sur les gros projets structurants là-bas. Et c'est vrai que on peut reprocher tout ce qu'on veut en fait aux institutions internationales, hein. Il y a beaucoup à dire, mais à la fin de la journée, on peut dire qu'on doit d'abord regarder dans notre propre cuisine avant d'aller regarder ce qui vient de l'extérieur. Il y a un vrai problème de coordination d'abord en interne. C'est vrai qu'on peut demander aux bailleurs de se coordonner, de faire tout ce qu'ils veulent, il n'y a pas de souci, mais le demandeur, c'est l'État. Et c'est à l'État de s'organiser, parce que les financements sont là, il ne manque pas de financement, et des engagements, mais il faut une coordination. Les besoins sont là. Pour le cas de Madagascar, il n'y a tellement pas d'organisation, enfin en tout cas elle doit être améliorée, qu'il y a des initiatives BAD, des initiatives GIZ, des initiatives KfW, World Bank et je ne sais quelle autre institution. Chacun a son programme et très souvent, c'est pour le même projet, il va y avoir une superposition de financement pour le même projet, alors qu'on pourrait en fait, avec une meilleure coordination en interne, parce que ce ne sont pas les bailleurs internationaux qui connaissent tous les besoins du pays, c'est le pays qui connaît ses besoins. Et donc c'est en fonction de ces besoins qu'il peut orienter. Voici, BAD, vous pouvez nous aider sur ce secteur. Banque mondiale, vous pouvez nous aider sur ce point. Coopération allemande, vous pouvez nous aider sur ce point. Donc ensemble, on arrive à couvrir en fait les différents gaps en fait des projets. Donc votre point en fait fait sens, mais à la fin de la journée, c'est aux États de s'organiser. Il doit y avoir un leadership national, pas international, national, avant et avant tout. Je ne peux pas venir chez vous, dans votre maison, et vous dire c'est comme ça qu'il faut placer la télé, c'est comme ça qu'il faut placer le canapé, la chambre elle doit être comme ça. Non, je ne peux pas venir faire ça. Et on doit l'appliquer au niveau national avant d'aller voir des bailleurs de fonds internationaux.
Thank you very much, everyone. With that, I would like to thank our distinguished panelists. I would like to thank the distinguished audience. We had a great session today. We heard about variety of challenges and also opportunities that we face in scaling up investment in renewable energy that tackle adaptation impact. That remind us that we all have a role to play if we want to see acceleration of energy transition with enhanced resiliency in the face of the climate change in the coming years. So with that, I would like to give the floor for the closing remark from my colleague, Alice. Alice, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tariq. Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the conclusion of our event today. At the outset, I wish to express my gratitude to our panelists for presenting their invaluable insights on developing and financing climate-focused projects related to energy and adaptation. I'd like to appreciate our panelists from the GCF and AFDB sharing their experiences on ecosystems and adaptation projects that aim to combat deforestation. It was refreshing to hear how the GCF supports cross-cutting adaptation projects and also supports communities in Africa. It was very insightful to hear about the objectives and achievements of the Desert to Power initiative that develops solar potential in Africa. Thank you for explaining how the facility works and how support is provided to private sector stakeholders in the context of Africa. I also would like to thank our panelists representing a financial advisory firm featuring debt and equity advisory in sub-Saharan Africa and beyond. Thank you for introducing your work to us, utilizing various financing modalities for renewable energy projects since the Paris Climate Conference. It was really insightful that you draw our attention to the importance of involving local banks and providing financing in local currency. I also would like to thank our panelists representing EDF and SODEN. It was important to learn how institutions' role was being emphasized. We are pleased to note how important local community perspectives and impacts by the economies of projects are also kept at high priority. It was insightful to hear about biomass projects that cover various perspectives, e.g. deforestation and agroforestry. Thank you for emphasizing the importance of local inputs and synergies. Thank you all for sharing your experiences and emphasizing the key role of coordination between private, public, and multilateral stakeholders, and showing such a strong commitment to on-the-ground projects that aim to create a climate-safe future for all of us. I wish you all the best in your efforts to drive the global energy transformation in the African context, as it will be central to securing the future of our children, grandchildren, and future generations of humanity. And last but not least, I would like to thank our interpreters for providing such an amazing service to all of us. Thank you and goodbye.